It's XCOM2. Sort of. Hello, I hope you're having a wonderful day. And if you're not, then I hope it gets better. Have yourself a treat. Something nice. Anyway, today is a bit of a different thing entirely to the last 100 videos I've uploaded onto YouTube because, well, the campaign is over. We won. We actually did the thing we set out to do and put a stop to the Avatar project. Central is confirmed to be proud, and the chairman, with all his judgments, went out in a blaze of glory to ensure we'd get the job done. So today, actually, I want to talk about all of it. Maybe this will be something interesting to you, maybe it won't be, but it felt like the right thing to do as a sort of bookend to what has been my first YouTube project. And honestly, what is life if not a bunch of things you did and then thought about afterwards? Actually, there's totally going to be a final stats update for the squad as of the end of the campaign. You thought I'd forgotten about that, I haven't, so please look forward to it. So first thing first, let's address the elephant nobody could hear that was nevertheless in the room. Sound. I've got a reason behind why the sound in the first, actually I don't even want to think about how many episodes it is, let's say 7. I've got a reason behind why the sound in the first 7 episodes is a bit, well, awful. It's a reason, but it's not really an excuse. It comes from Discord, to put it simply. I'm one of those people who keeps my volume low on Discord, with the wisdom being people find it far less obnoxious if they have to turn your volume up than if they have to turn your volume down. I'm sure you've been in a situation where you've been in a voice chat and someone joins who clearly hasn't put any thought into this and blow everyone's eardrums out when they say hello. I don't like being that guy. Unfortunately though, this doesn't really translate as well to creating content for YouTube as you might expect, and as I found out. Beyond that though, it kind of speaks a bit to my commitment. I had no idea when I started this project that I'd end up enjoying it as much as was the case by the end, and I wasn't sure I was going to see it through. It was honestly an experiment. It was something I've always wanted to try, and yeah, I just wasn't fully committed, I suppose, when I first started things. To my detriment, absolutely. It turns out this is something I really enjoy doing, and I'm probably going to continue doing. So, look forward to that. All that said and done, though, there is what I hope is a notable increase in audio quality as the campaign progresses, and particularly in the later parts. I upgraded my hardware fairly substantially by around about episode 81, so hopefully that kind of, reflects at least a little bit. All that said, yes, that is a reason, but it is an excuse. And the criticism I've received on it is something I've agreed with and, hopefully acted on. It's a lesson learned for the next series more than anything else. And I'm sure I'll eventually reach a point where I look back at those opening episodes and indeed this entire campaign and think, good grief, what was I doing? But here we are now. So what next? Well, actually, I might as well talk a bit about editing, just while I'm still in this impromptu sort of making of segment. I think I could have gotten away with editing out the squad equipment sections a lot sooner, and instead have the old fade to black that became a feature later on in the campaign, far sooner than it ended up being. I mean, I'm talking, this probably should have been something that was just done by around about like episode 10, maybe? I don't know, maybe you disagree. Another thing I had a lot of conversations with myself about was editing out the loading time between launching a mission and then that mission actually starting. But in particular in some episodes more than others, I ultimately decided against it and used it instead as an opportunity to just talk for a bit or play around with some silly jump edits and things like that. I think that worked about as well as I was hoping for it to. There's certainly some room for improvement there. But I enjoyed going with that approach, so I'm kind of going to just stick with my guns on that one. And if nothing else, I hope you learned that Siberia is a place in Russia. Apart from this project, though, I actually haven't edited video in a long time. In fact, the last real editing work I did was in university, which was at least 5 minutes ago. It was really good to be back doing the editing thing. And aside from, playing the game and getting to talk about it, the editing was actually my favorite part of the entire process. It's something I'm hoping I continue to enjoy and improve at, and if nothing else, I think that's quite nice. And finally, it turns out that actually uploading things to YouTube and using all the functionality that is provided to you as a creator is a skill unto itself. There are definitely some things I didn't make use of that will probably become more relevant in the future, and as the channel, let's not get ahead of things too much here, but as the channel grows, the biggest thing I didn't include that YouTube has available is probably video chapters, which I'm sure you'll be familiar with. Some games really don't need them in my opinion, but actually I do think XCOM does benefit from them. There's a lot of stuff that happens in a given episode, and if you're just interested in the mission, for example, then making it easier to get to that part of the video is probably worth doing. I didn't change my tack and start including those chapters later on, etc., but there's a bit of me that maybe thinks I should have. I don't know. Anyway, let's actually talk about the campaign itself now that I'm done doing that whole making all spiel. It's about time. We've been here just over 6 minutes. We'll start with difficulty. I've got a pretty strained relationship with Legend difficulty in XCOM 2, and that's why I didn't start out on that difficulty in the campaign. It's long, and it can become a bit of a slog to get through without necessarily being more challenging than Commander is, especially in the tactical layer. At least this is true in the base game. Certainly not as true if you're running mods to the extent that it was for this campaign. Nevertheless, when I set out, I had every intention of sticking to Commander difficulty, and this would have led to a shorter and honestly a less dramatic campaign, if I'm being entirely honest about it, which is, kind of the point of doing this whole thing. So yeah, I'm very glad I made the switch to Legend when I did, and I think it actually worked out for a few reasons, some of which are, more interesting than others. Early game XCOM makes or breaks a campaign in a lot of ways, but, and this is a big but, it's very boring to play through for the 50th, 60th, I've lost count of how many times, and I assume at least it's also boring to watch. So starting on Commander, it meant that I was able to get through that early game a lot quicker and get into the mid game, which is, in my own opinion, where XCOM 2 is actually at its best, a lot quicker. And as well, if nothing else, it isn't like the stage of the campaign that I played on Commander wasn't without drama, like we lost Lianlu and Aussie Mix during that time after all. Doing this, though, had a weird side effect that I didn't account for at the time, and I need to talk a little bit about game mechanics to sort of, get my point on this across. Force level, which I'll get into exactly what it is in a sec, increases faster on Commander difficulty than it does on Legend. Force level increases every 10 days on Commander and every 15 days of in-game time on Legend. And this might seem silly on the surface, but it just accounts for the increased campaign length imposed by Legend difficulty in real terms. So switching to Legend after Commander difficulty has been running for a bit means you end up at a higher force level than if you'd been on Legend the entire time, more or less. And it's not a significant difference, it's maybe a +1 or a +2. Nevertheless, it kind of worked out being the case that starting out on Commander meant that the aliens were fielding stronger troops sooner, in particular when we moved to Legend. Insofar as what force level does and what it is, in the base game, it's actually hidden from you as a player. You can get a mod to show the force level on the strategic layer, which is exactly what was the case in this campaign here. And I'm not going to pretend that I know what enemies show up at which force level and things like that, because I don't. But to sum up in a sentence what force level does, it honestly is exactly what it sounds like. A higher number equals stronger enemies and more of them. Irrespective of all of that, and indeed anything else though, I do think switching to Legend was the right choice, and I'm glad I stuck with it through to the very end, even though it did mean the campaign was suddenly twice the length. Speaking to the campaign length though, I actually think I'm to blame for some of that as well, particularly when it comes to how many dark events I made a point of countering over the course of things. This, had the additional effect of making things easier in the long run, but that's ultimately a good or bad thing depending on your perspective. From my perspective, making things slightly easier is a good thing, If you just wanted to see everyone die horribly, then maybe it's a bad thing. I don't know. The thing with the dark events mechanic in XCOM 2 is that I actually tend to find a lot of the modifiers that they add to be more of an annoyance than something you really need to plan around or account for or impose a actual challenge on you. And this isn't true for all of them, of course, but they're one of those like great idea subpar execution things within the game overall. That being said though, like having to eat the extra cost of recruits very early on was something that did have a significant impact throughout the campaign, so who am I to say that dark events are something that could be improved? Whilst improvements on theme, I think taking a minute to discuss loadouts is worthwhile. In the standard unmodded XCOM 2, the ideal loadout generally includes a liberal use of blue screen rounds over almost any other option, and this was basically true in the modded campaign as well. I think this speaks more to the general power of mechanical enemies in the game, perhaps being a little too high, more so than it does suggest there aren't many other valuable options. The truth is that the enemies you often want to make sure you've got an answer for are all susceptible to blue screen, or black ice in our case, so why wouldn't you take as many as possible? It's one of those XCOM 2 things though, and I honestly was pretty glad to have black ice rounds to use. At least there was an upgrade to blue screens that felt like a really good increase in power, and they didn't really break anything either. The other use case for the black ice rounds came into play by the fact that during the campaign we saw a lot, and I mean a serious lot, of shielded enemies. In particular, like in the later stages. So like being able to no-sell shielding on those enemies, particularly on the paladin enemies with their fire, acid, psionic shields, that was a huge help, and it made black ice even more relevant. And then you can't talk about the black ice rounds without also mentioning their damage over time effect, which came in clutch several times, including in the very final mission, putting that Riftkeeper Mark II down for good. Of course, before the final mission, there were many others. In fact, almost 100 missions were ran through the campaign, and far too many of them were in sewers, or subways for my liking. If you asked me to make a list of things I was expecting to generate a level of fatigue or frustration, the map type would not have made the list, but here we are. For a bit of background, the sewer maps weren't added until the War of the Chosen expansion, and up until now, for me, they've always existed as a pretty mid-tier map type that doesn't do a lot to show off how good XCOM 2, which is a game released 8 years ago by the way, still manages to look. They're an interesting challenge every now and then, with the tight corridors and the lack of high ground available for use, but the rate they were appearing in the campaign was far too high. When I do come back to XCOM 2, I think one of the main priorities I'll have is to find a mod that fixes that, or find the relevant game files and see if there's something I can edit for myself. Because, yeah, there were just too many sewers. Too many sewers. I think, setting aside the design and everything else of them, as I say, they do sort of pose an interesting challenge with their twisty corners and corridors and things like that. The biggest problem I've actually got with sewers in XCOM 2, and this is largely true for sewers in any video game, the color palette is brown. You are looking at brown. Sometimes you are looking at brown for upwards of an hour, and it's just not visually interesting. Never mind everything else, you know? All that said, this kind of does make me wonder though if there's a section of the Advent Field Manual for generals that's just dedicated to explaining how they should run into the sewers at the first sign of danger. It's really strange that there are so many generals or other higher ranking officers down in sewers. Kind of makes you wonder. Of course, the generals and the field commanders weren't the only enemies to deal with, in a sewer or otherwise. There were many mods being ran dedicated to adding new enemy types or enemy unit upgrades. One of my favourite things about the campaign was running into these new enemies and dealing with whatever brand of nonsense they were trying to deliver. In the base game of XCOM 2 War of the Chosen, there are around about 17 unique types of enemy that you can run into over the course of the campaign, which is a very respectable amount. Please don't get me wrong and assume I don't think it is, because it absolutely is. Mods being used to the extent that they were in this campaign, though, meant that there were nearly double the amount of unique types of enemy. And there were around about 30 different enemies that could show up throughout the course of the campaign that's just concluded. And that's split between, you know, Advent and Aliens alike, and that's not including the upgrade tiers for those enemies either. Nevertheless, there were certainly some enemies that I probably won't be running the mod for again in the future, or I'll be making some custom modifications to. In actual fact, there were already some custom modifications in play for the campaign, and some enemies I didn't modify but kind of wish I had. Very top of this list, by a country-wide margin, is the Venator. So the standard variant added by the mod Venators Come From has Venators land in Legend difficulty with 29 hit points, and some spawn rules that are, in my opinion, frankly insane. This is a knock against the mod author, by the way. In fact, all of this stuff is up front on the mod page, and they are a wonderful enemy addition to the late game. The mod page also provides instructions for making your own edits if you're a coward like I am, and if you're interested, the mod author is Leader Enemy Boss, aka LEB, and the mod is LEB's late game enemies. When it comes down to it though, for the Venators, in some testing I did, they're a little, we'll call it overtuned with scare quotes, and I ultimately had no shame at all in knocking their health pool down to a more reasonable 20. There are a few other enemies I changed the values for, but nothing really as substantial as the hit Venators ended up taking. I think it worked out. I don't really get the sense that something could have been made more interesting if the Venators had their natural health pool. So, yeah, I think it worked out, and I stand by the cowardly decision that I made. I should probably throw a special mention to the Riftkeeper Mark II here, as well as the other Gatekeeper variations that we saw during the campaign. There's something to be said about their ability to field the amount of reinforcements they're capable of, but I'm actually glad I left that alone ultimately. It's not the type of challenge that the unmodded version of XCOM 2 tends to have you dealing with, so it is welcome in that regard. And, you know, the final Riftkeeper that we had to deal with in the campaign, spawning in those Muton Devastators, was certainly a moment. Another challenge that I didn't expect going into this was the missions taking as long as they sometimes did. This was particularly problematic whenever the Lost showed up. Complication became more about how long my own sanity was willing to maintain itself, rather than anything the Lost were capable of doing. And this isn't really something that can be fixed without outright removing Lost from the game. And I do think that the Lost are interesting enough, particularly in the early game, where just outright removing them doesn't quite sit right. I think it just comes down to the fact that their efficacy falls off as they struggle to keep up with the toys and power that you as a player end up having access to. All that said though, there were some particularly fun moments in the Lost missions that I don't want to pretend didn't happen by focusing too much on the negatives. Seeing the assassin getting absolutely bodied by the Lost in episode 32 is a really good example of this. But I do have to be negative. In my personal opinion, episode 66 and episode 94 are two of the worst missions that I had to run in this entire campaign. I'm really sorry if you enjoyed them. They just were not enjoyable to play through at all. They went on forever, and particularly in the case of episode 66, it ended up really just being a fight against the game mechanics rather than playing with the game mechanics. But that is enough negativity. Let's switch gears a little bit and talk a little bit about the missions I really did enjoy, which is surprisingly quite difficult for me because I don't want the list of missions that I really enjoyed to be too long. So rather than go through all of that, I've selected some personal highlights instead. Starting with episode 12, the event, and this was probably the first episode that showcased how things can quickly go wrong in XCOM 2 in really weird and wonderful ways, and it's a testament to the fact that the game still manages to surprise me after hundreds of hours of playing it. That objective, being blown up by Griffith, is seared into my memory.
And then the question isn't can you hit, the question is can you kill. It hasn't got armor, but we're gonna need that 4. And it's good. And you blew up the access point that we came here for. Oh well. Whoops.
Got a group of hostiles over here.
Next on the list is episode 17, Below the Roof. It's another example of things not quite going to plan, but nevertheless something genuinely enjoyable to figure out after the fact and work with. Did you know explosives cause problems quite a few times throughout any campaign of XCOM 2, and in particular for this one. And explosives also don't really mix with you trying to be all like sneaky and infiltratey. Who knew?
Ooh, that's a good little mine. Yeah, we're gonna mine this. And then we're gonna blow everything up. Hopefully not the roof with us on it. We can let the mine take care of the purifier and then that thing there as well, although now I am conscious that that's going to blow the roof. Well,
Grenade!
Live and learn. That takes care of the armor. Mine takes care of purifier, and it does take care of the roof as well. Arc enemy and Athos have fallen and taken a couple of points of damage there. They both have. It actually just slapped them in the face, just like Apprehension got slapped in the face by a giant robot. All right. As far as openers go, blowing a hole in the roof that you're standing on might not have been the smartest thing to do, but hopefully we win points for style.
The next one is episode 27, Bleeding Out. And this is the first sort of real are we going to make it episode, for lack of a better way of describing it. The bleed out mechanic in XCOM 2 isn't one that we got to see very often, but when it did show up, it switched the priorities of the mission around, and that's a particular standout of episode 27 in my opinion. And it was a lot of fun to kind of like work around that and figure out what the hell we were going to do.
That mech is looking pretty threatening. I'm hoping that Arc Enemy makes for an enticing target, although, wow. Not this enticing. Okay. 6 damage from the Stun Lancer there is brutal. And he's down to 3. This might be the end of Arc Enemy. It's probably not my favourite. Okay, he's bleeding out. He's bleeding out. There's a chance. This is gonna suck. Ah, that's what happens when you miss a 75% shot, Athos.
Episode 35, Live Dangerously, is the episode during which Athel got shot in the face by the assassin and luckily ended up bleeding out. It wasn't the first time or the last time we'd get really lucky in the campaign, but given the fact that Athel was with us right until the bitter end, I'm quite glad that him being shot in the face here didn't spell his end. I'm mostly just highlighting this one because, well,
You will not escape. Enjoy these fleeting breaths while they last.
Oh, dear me. Yeah. Suppose we have been playing a little bit risky with Athel.
it would be criminal of me to not mention episode 47, Trainwreck. This is probably the best example from the entire campaign as to how a single decision going wrong can cause just a nasty cascade of failures. That single missed shot from Lunko ended up costing 2 lives, well, okay, 1 life, and then having a much harder fight with the Viper Prince that showed up afterwards. It's probably my personal choice for most appropriate title as well.
That's the only way that Overguard stays alive here. Otherwise, Overguard is dead. So the question is saving Overguard the right decision? And I'm not going to pretend that there's a part of me that doesn't think it is. Because if we look at this shot on the mech, Lunko dealing with this mech is huge. But Overgod dies. But Lunko dealing with the mech means that our chances of survival go up. Because Grim decided to be on fire. And that's all his fault.
Okay, I'll go.
You just go stash around there. Loco, you better land this shot. That's all I'm going to say. You better land this shot.
Shot failed to connect. Weapons burning ammo fast. I can make it.
Of all of the shots to miss.
I can't move.
And that's exactly why we needed Lunko to land that shot. What a useless, useless man.
The best mission ever, episode 54, isn't one I want to talk about for too long, but it's, in my opinion, another accurate title. To say I loved this mission is a bit of an understatement, and all the more impressive is that it took place in a sewer, given everything that I've just said about sewers. The mission really showcased how ridiculously powerful assault infantry and phalanxes could be, and the fact that the entire squad survived it, some of the luckiest XCOM 2 I've ever seen or played. Yep, best mission ever.
There are 17 active enemies. And there are 6 of us. Actually, there are 5 of us because Tactical's currently in stasis. We've got 6 turns to kill all of them, blow up that purple thing, and then go home. May the odds ever be in our favor.
Up next is episode 65, Barely Made It, which was another bleed out mission. Far more difficult than what we've seen in episode 27 when you look at the bleed out stuff. And looking back on it, I do actually think there were some questionable decisions made by myself. Beyond all of that bleed out stuff though, one standout feature was the smartest Exalt unit I've ever seen.
Pop, pop. Mine goes pop. Any moment now. Any moment now, Tequila.
My ammo's running low.
Oh, wow. Outstanding maneuver. What an escape. I can't even be mad.
No ammunition.
I mean, I could be terrified that Lunko's on 3 hit points. Oh well, they're gone now. That's the important thing.
And the last highlight, for now at least, is episode 86, Risky Business. XCOM 2 is a far better game than its predecessor in a lot of ways, but one in particular that stands out to me is the way in which it makes objectives far more important, relevant, and dangerous. There's also the whole mission timer thing, but that's had so many words written and said about it already, so I don't want to dwell on it too much. Episode 86 though is probably the closest in the campaign we came to failing an important objective and yet succeeding, and it was a really fun mission to play as a result. Also stressful.
On my way.
Can you open the door from there? Sugar, I forgot about tracking shot. I'm in a little bit of a panic about our VIP here, okay? You can open the door though, yeah. It's just supply caches, we can live without them. Just get that VIP out of there. Actually, could you... This is a very silly use of overdrive, but I'm so conscious of losing the VIP. Yes. Get out. Go literally anywhere else. Well, maybe not literally. You get the idea. Go... where are you? You're up there. Go here. I guess. I don't love that. Go here. Go here. Go anywhere that isn't inside that truck. There are far more highlights, both positive and negative, that I could run through here, but as I said, I don't want this to just end up being a reel, and, you know, I'd actually be quite curious about what other opinions on the high points and low points were as well. All I can say for certain is that there were far more ups than downs from my own perspective, and for every part of this campaign that was frustrating or annoying or any other negative adjective, there were far more parts of it that I absolutely loved playing and just sort of cemented the fact that XCOM 2 is one of my all-time favourite games. There's a couple more orders of business, like, that I want to cover at least. There's probably a lot more that I could talk about, but I don't want to turn this into a huge video essay about the XCOM 2 campaign that just concluded, because, quite frankly, I'm not about that life. So yeah, one more thing, stats. I've broken the final stats pages into 2 separate images, as I wanted to put some additional focus on the squad that ultimately ran the Leviathan Gauntlet, came out the other side, or did they? So, you know, let's get to it. Our final pre-Leviathan death was, unfortunately, Dirthel, taken down by bullets to the face, courtesy of Mutons taking advantage of Dirthel being in low cover. Dirthel didn't see a tremendous amount of action throughout the campaign, but was nevertheless a big loss. Where Dirthel did show up, she was always extremely effective, and as we've just seen, knew how to blow a roof. One thing I actually didn't realise whilst playing, but have now realised at the end here, is the distinct lack of Marine usage throughout everything in the campaign. In fact, our only Marines were Shandin, Obergard, and Shaika. Obergard went down thanks to decisions. Shaika saw limited action in everything except covert ops, and our only sort of significant Marine was Shandin. Kind of peculiar to me because Marines were actually quite good. They just weren't a huge feature, similar to the Tech Specialist. I think in future runs, Tech Specialist Marines I'd like to see more of, more often, as well as the Infiltrator Spark unit, represented by Volkros here, who actually just wasn't seen at all. I think what's also quite impressive is the sheer insanity that was required in order to add Farley and Kipper to the squad, only for us to not use them. Insofar as pre-Leviathan kill counts, Bert managed to achieve the highest, but Clav was extremely close behind, 95 and 94 respectively. I think special mention should also go out to Carmortar, who joined as an assault infantry comparatively late on to the other assault infantries that we have, but nevertheless was able to make a huge impact whenever they were on a mission. And I'd like to pretend that I tried to balance things out fairly evenly, and I'm even on record as saying I don't necessarily like having A-team, B-team situations in XCOM 2, but the truth of it is that it's hard to escape that reality, and I think that's reflected in the statistics that we're seeing here. It reaches a point where it's genuinely difficult to find space for the lower ranked members of the team, and some of the squad here did fall to the wayside because of the way they were built. Andromac and Reed in particular just weren't as effective as their other assault infantry counterparts, in large part due to not having access to the melee capabilities that the likes of Aethel had. I think as well, in general, I'd like to use Spark units more frequently. Kurog and Diurna in particular became extreme powerhouses later on in the campaign. I'd love to see more of what they can do earlier on, and then also I want to just see more of the Infiltrator unit that we didn't see at all. I'd be derelict in my duties to not do one last run through the deceased, of which we have 14. Lianlu ran the Overwatch Gauntlet and didn't see the other side of it. Ozzymix was the first, and actually I think only, victim of a ruler. Pryad and Mufus weren't able to withstand the horrific ambush. Keisha was the cost of us learning what a Spectre is really capable of. Sinatra was left behind when we had a mission go extremely badly. Obergard and Grimm met their fate on the same mission that Lunko missed that one shot. Spacey was our real introduction to the power of Black Ice Codexes and bit it from a nasty pincer attack. Aesalas was a lesson in how Exalt Tech Specialist can and will take advantage of combat protocol in the ways that many an XCOM 2 player no doubt has. Zari was our introduction to Exalt having tier 3 weaponry and using it to horrifying effect. Lunko also ended up meeting their end via Black Ice Codexes, although I think an exploding bit of cover didn't help matters. Tactical, another one taken down by Exalt, grenades were the dish of the day there. And finally, Durthal, who, as mentioned before, taken down by Muton bullies that were actual Mutons and also bullies. And so, onto the Leviathan squad. And what a squad. First of all, competition for the top spot on the kill count was extremely close between Gwen and Aethel. I think Gwen ultimately wins due to more lost kills, but there really isn't that much between the two of them overall. Hawks joined the campaign very late, which is pretty well reflected in their kill count being so low. If we're looking at time spent in the overall team, Shandin, Nacho, and Trollpants are the only episode 1 members who were in the Leviathan squad. Trollpants actually didn't show up until after episode 1, but was in the initial loadout of rookies you start the game with. Nacho and Shandin were, in fact, in episode 1. Losing Diurna, particularly due to the fact that avatars are immune to explosions, right at the end, felt a bit bad, but equally I do think it was kind of appropriate. Diurna had put their work in, done their job. I think looking back, I might have preferred having Clav on the final mission instead of Hawks. I really did miss a marksman to secure a few kills that the squad was sent in ultimately weren't able to confirm on their own. At the same time, Hawks joined late, proved to be useful, and in actual fact, a complete marvel at landing some shots that they really had no right of otherwise hitting. I don't include Leviathan in the same breath as the likes of episode 66 and 94, I believe it was. Insofar as like being super long, Leviathan's actually a brilliant showcase of how a long mission in XCOM 2 can be a lot of fun. Unlike those earlier missions that I mentioned that lasted far longer than they had any right to, Leviathan manages to keep the pressure on you all the way through. And there were several moments during the run that we had where I was sure we were all dead and the campaign was going to end extremely differently to the way it did. Can't say any of the success is down to player skill. It's definitely luck that won the day. And I suppose luck is the defining feature in XCOM. You're spending all your time trying to put the odds of winning in your own favour, and you have to know when you're just not going to find that. We did see a few real disasters in the campaign, but honestly, this is the stuff that makes the game so damn great, as far as I'm concerned. So, what's next? We will be seeing some of the Leviathan squad again very soon, as well as some other familiar names from the campaign. They may have defeated the aliens on Earth, but there was a slight teleporter malfunction, and not everyone made it back to the Avenger safely, finding themselves thrown far across the galaxy to an unfamiliar world, somewhere out on the far rim. See you next time. Take care.